This is episode 1106.
And in a nutshell, it's been a real tailwind, and I'll tell you why. Two things. You alluded to it. We were doing AI. We were doing some of our own LLM work before the advent of any of these technologies. And as you spent time with customers, people looked at you prior to ChatGPT almost as science fiction. We can really do this. I'm a little bit nervous. This is a little scary. And so on one hand, from a marketing perspective, with the advent of ChatGPT, with the advent of Anthropic and other models, it became mainstream. And so we had countless examples of customers saying, I was a little scared before ChatGPT. Now I get it. Where do I write the check, right? So from a marketing perspective, big deal for us. We really were able to sort of ride those coattails. Also, from a technology perspective, the advent of these LLMs allowed us to use a hybrid approach to AI. So we definitely are using the LLMs now, but that allows us to go innovate closer to the customer and to more specific tailored examples. It saves us a whole bunch of time and money from not having to do the generic understanding that you get from LLMs and allow us to focus where, our innovation most matters.
What if your CRM only told you 1% of the story? On today's episode, we speak with Tim Ritters, CFO of Gong, an AI-driven platform that claims to unlock the other 99% of customer insight. Before Gong, Tim spent a decade inside Google's data-driven culture, where cross-functional execution wasn't optional. It was day one. Now at Gong, Tim's helping scale a platform that has reportedly analyzed over 3.5 billion customer interactions. Tim shares with us how AI is changing the buyer mindset, why traditional CRMs fall short, and how Gong is helping organizations move from data capture to real customer intelligence. Our talk with CFO Tim Ritters begins after this.
When it comes to company spend, most finance teams are on defense, reacting to surprise spend, chasing receipts, saying no. But there's a better way. Meet Brex, the AI-powered spend platform that boosts a company's control, earnings, and speed. 99% of customer spend is compliant. 11 million hours saved on expenses and accounting through automation. $681 million plus dollars back to customers in business building rewards. Make every dollar count with Brex.
Hello, we're speaking with Tim Ritters, CFO of Gong. Tim, welcome.
Jack, thanks for having me. Looking forward to today.
Yeah, I got excited as I looked through your bio. There's some marquee companies in your past, and we look forward to touching on them with you. But hey, take a look back, all the way back, because this is not your first CFO tour of duty, so we have to go a little further back than some. But take us back. What were some of those experiences you feel prepared you first to become a finance leader?
Yeah, so I started out way back, Jack. I was a CPA. I worked for Deloitte early in my career, and frankly, I think that was a really good grounding exercise. You got so much exposure to so many companies at so quickly and early in your career that it really set up a good trajectory for me in the future. Ever since, I've been in now growth technology for 25 years. I spent a decade at Google in a number of capacities. And then as you alluded to, I was previously a CFO at a company called Pure Storage, a technology listed public company. And now here 5.5 years at Gong.
I noticed your Big Four accounting experience. It's really two chapters in one. You were an auditor and then you jumped to the consulting side. What were you up to there?
Yeah, great question, Jack. So first of all, did this classic audit sort of work, classic sort of work coming out of college. But, this was the late 90s, early 2000s, and we moved very quickly into a lot of technology consulting. The year 2000, Y2K for longtime listeners, was a big deal back then. And we started to do a lot of that work. And I started doing a lot of the precursor to what today's business intelligence products are. So a lot of exciting time there as well.
Landing at Google, can you just give us your first, and again, this is sort of earlier earlier time at Google, search was it was taking off very rapidly, but still relative early days. Share with us how you first landed there.
Yeah, Jack, interestingly enough, I came out to Silicon Valley in 2002 and I worked for a CRM company called Siebel Systems. That's now a part of Oracle. And I was going through, frankly, a career crisis. I was a product manager of all things at Siebel Systems. I kind of took a detour from finance for a moment. And I still enjoyed my finance roots and I couldn't quite decide what I wanted to be when I really grew up. And I found probably the perfect job for me at the time at Google. It was a product manager job that was working on all the financial systems at Google. So I had a flavor of both. And it was those first 2 years at Google were some of the most impactful for me because I could exercise both sides of the brain, which is a fantastic experience.
As you look back now, and we'd love for you to get a little more specific with us as far as those early career experiences are concerned. When you think about advancing into finance leadership, it seems to me you still could have gone a number of different directions at Google, but you advanced into more senior finance roles. Is that right? Or had you made up your mind already that it's going to be finance is my lane and now and for always?
Yeah, it was a couple years in. That first role, Jack, had a great experience. And then it was time to say, okay, which path do I want to take? And I would say it's about 2 years into my tenure at Google that it became clear that I really wanted to pursue that finance career. And from there, I had about 6 different jobs at Google in different finance capacities, including some time spent overseas. And if I had to say one word, it was diversity, diversity of experiences. I had a variety of different finance experiences. And I think that was what really set me up to take that next step to be a CFO.
And of course, Google is known for its data-driven culture. Can you share with us, how did that environment shape your thinking around finance decision-making?
Yeah, it's who I am today. Everything was data driven. We analyzed so much information, and obviously, given the size of the company, the volumes of information that we had at our disposal were significant, right? And so it really was my training ground, if you will, to sort of drive a data driven and a customer centric approach to sort of analyzing business problems. It's who I am today.
And just want to cross-functional initiatives at Google. And again, we speak to a lot of finance leaders about how important it is that finance partner with the business and what have you. But that experience at Google, I imagine there were cross-functional initiatives where you got to understand better how to do that, how to partner with the business. Can you reflect on that for us?
Almost from day one, Jack. One of my first jobs was to coordinate with product management, with engineering, with marketing, and with finance to launch a variety of financial products for Google around the world. So day one, you're working cross-functionally, so important in whatever capacity you take.
So around the world, as you described, that exposure to global operations at Google, how did that explain better how it influenced the way you approach scaling finance teams and processes?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would advocate anyone that has an opportunity to have an international experience, do it. No question about it. What you really start to realize is that every country is really complex. They have different laws. Finance people, we all know that many countries have different currencies, different business practices. And so, it really opens your mind to understanding that, solving for one country is not solving for all countries. And you really need to think with a global mindset if you're going to scale a business successfully.
Was there any type of, I want to call it a habit, I think, any type of habit that you picked up at Google? Something that, you've made a cornerstone of your approach to work and leadership?
Launch and iterate. I really admired and continue to admire this day the pace at which sort of Google moves, and it's not afraid to make mistakes, right? But it launches and iterates. It moves fast. And I think it's one of the key reasons it's been as successful as it has been. And it's certainly something and a mindset that I've brought to sort of the companies that I've worked with since.
You were out at Silicon Valley at the time you were part of Google?
Correct. So I spent most of my time, about 7 years at Google in Silicon Valley in Mountain View, California. Those other 3 years were spent in Dublin, Ireland.
What is there anything as you had those conversations with peers outside of Google, and I'm not, that maybe you realized this really does set us apart somehow, or my experience that I'm obtaining here? Anything?
I think it's a handful of things, Jack. I think we talked a little bit earlier about it. This launch and iterate and move fast, clearly a tenet of Google. A commitment to customer focus, a real, customer centricity, if you will. And last but not least, and we touched a little bit about this earlier as well, is this cross-functional collaboration. One of the things I just admired is it didn't matter what function you were at Google. It didn't matter what role you had at Google. You all thought of yourself as business people first and not necessarily a functional expert. And I think that collaboration was just something special as I talked to sort of peers and colleagues.
When you do leave, you step into a CFO role. Is that right? And
Correct.
yeah. So was there would you let us know, is there a recruiter involved in this important step, or is it your network?
A little bit of both, Jack. Obviously, a lot of companies do work with recruiters, but also was started to network and really had a great relationship with our CFO at Google. His name was Patrick. And I said, Patrick, I want to be a CFO. And he was so helpful in just sort of guiding me and giving me sort of feedback and mentorship both prior and post my decision. And was so excited to do it. Wanted to put all the pieces together that I'd seen at Google in terms of the different finance disciplines. And so it was a great move for me.
5 years, not a small chapter as CFOs go.
Mm-hmm.
An IPO on your watch, fundraising on your watch, a lot of things that maybe you didn't ever experience at Google. Am I right about that? Or how
Absolutely.
did you?
All new learnings, right? So obviously a lot of groundwork was laid, but there was a variety of new things that you're going to get. And obviously, the buck stops with you as a finance professional at the CFO level, whereas, prior you had sort of people that were ultimately responsible for this. It's now on your shoulders to make sure it's successful.
Well, so can you, anything you can share from that IPO track? Again, this is you had to learn quickly. This was an accelerated learning environment, I would imagine. Anything as you look back on it now, what you got right, what you would do differently?
Yeah, a couple of things, and as you said, it was speed. I joined Pure and we were public 14 months later. So it was absolutely sort of, rapid, hyper focus and hyper speed. I think the key point is knowing where your personal gaps are and surrounding yourself with great people, right? You're always, a number of leaders at Google always had this mantra of hire people better than yourself. And really surround yourself with, filling out the gaps that you have. And boy, that sort of feedback, that sort of notation, if you will, served me exceptionally well at Pure. Because as you said, you don't know everything, especially as a first-time CFO.
Yeah, but the communication piece of this, communicating with Wall Street, communicating with those analysts, how did you step up to do that? And I'm wondering, did that experience come at Google? Did you get to sit in on investor calls or relations calls, or what would you share with us?
Yeah, I love that question, Jack. It probably the most poignant sort of piece of feedback my mentor, Patrick, the CFO at Google, gave me. He said, I was not involved in a lot of IR stuff at all at Google. It was primarily on the inside. I ran the overall corporate FP&A function at Google, was my last role at the company. And he pulled me aside and he said, "Hey, I'm so excited for you to be a CFO. I want to give you a piece of feedback." He's like, "You're going to have to morph your style now, right? Not that it was a bad style, but as an inwardly focused CFO, you're going to be pushing, you're going to be sort of prodding, you're going to be looking for the absolute truth and, turning and twisting the dials. Your mindset needs to shift. You're more into a sales and marketing role as you sort of spend time with investors, and it's nuanced, but it's important." And I tell you, Jack, that is the most important piece of advice I'd ever received, because your persona needs to shift delicately. And if you don't get that right, obviously you're going to sort of struggle a bit in your engagement with the investor community.
Was there any sort of outreach you did? Did you, and again, it's wonderful you had that CFO mentor. I imagine there were other, publicly traded finance executives that you might have reached out for. Again, it just seems like you had to take a crash course.
Yeah, I did. Certainly all of what you described. And I think the other important thing for me, one of the reasons I chose Pure, I was looking at a variety of different sort of options. And it went to the quality of the board, because as a CFO, your new boss is largely your board, especially your audit chair, right? Naturally, your CEO is your boss, but they'll be the first to tell you, I'm not a functional expert in finance. So my advice to people taking on a CFO role is look to your audit chair. And we had an amazing audit chair, a gentleman by the name of Mark Garrett, who was the CFO of Adobe at the time. Learned so much from him as well. But my advice is look at that board and see how they're going to help and grow you as well, because that's that next port of call as a CFO.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, we do have a few more career-related questions for you, but right now, let's find out about Gong. You joined in 2019. So again, you've been there about 5 years as well. So
Yeah.
a lot of milestones have likely already been met. But tell us about Gong. What is this company?
Yeah, first of all, for those of you that don't know Gong, Gong is the leader in revenue AI technology. And we got started about 10 years ago, and we asked a really interesting question, and we set out to answer that question, which was, what could we do if we gathered the 99% of information about your customer that was not in a traditional CRM? You think about it. We all use CRMs at some point in our life. We put a couple of sentences in, but what if we could ingest all the dialogue that you're having, all the documents, all the email traffic? Fast forward 10 years, we've now analyzed 3.5 billion customer interactions with the technology. We serve about 4,700 customers today worldwide, including some of the most notable and analytically sophisticated companies in the world. Think people like Google, Anthropic, LinkedIn, and Canva. And we're solving real business problems by gathering enormous amounts of data, Jack, to sort of make smart business decisions.
Now, I believe you, Gong recently surpassed the 300 million revenue run rate. What's contributing to that? And that's organic growth?
That is organic growth, all organic growth, actually, Jack. Haven't done really a lot of acquisitions. It really comes down to a couple of things. Number one, customers, this resonates. I talked a little bit about my time at Siebel Systems. Siebel was the first generation of CRMs. Obviously Salesforce and HubSpot and others are that sort of next generation. But again, we're now moving to a world where we're gathering so much information and being able to leverage AI technologies. I think that we're at a dawn of a new era in terms of understanding your customer. And obviously, we've been at the forefront of that. And I think, it resonates with customers. Obviously, AI is a buzzword today, but when discerning customers pull back the onion, or peel back the onion, if you will, they start seeing some of the incredible sort of results. We see sort of, a halving of deal cycle times with technology like Gong, for example, and obviously a whole host of other metrics as well. So again, we really like the sweet spot that we're in right now.
So as I said, 5 years, that's some time. So could you give us a sense of how maybe the customer mix has evolved over that time?
Yeah, great question. We, like many technology companies, we started with a tech-centric kind of SMB market. The people that were kind of the tinkerers, if you will, wanted to take a look at new technologies. But to your point, over those 5 years, 5.5 years, we've done two really important things. We've diversified our revenue base in terms of a variety of different industries. We have major healthcare companies using the technology now, and obviously we've gone up market. Right now, not a lot of people know this, but Gong serves 4 of the Fortune 10 companies, right, with multi-million-dollar installations. So obviously, really sort of developing that enterprise muscle, super important as well.
Now, during your tenure, I would imagine is the customer success piece of this and the go-to-market strategy. Did that all get minted and grown, or reflect on that for
100%, 100%. And as you allude to, it's not just pre-sales, it's not just the selling function, but it's the customer success function, right? It's one thing to sell to customers. It's another thing to deliver on the promise. It's almost like the adage in mountain climbing, getting to the top of the mountain is only half the journey, right? And so it was super important. And we've got a great group of leaders at the company that have really sort of taken a focus on both go-to-market as well as making sure our customers are successful and happy.
When I see a CFO with 2 sort of CFO chapters or volumes on a shelf, and I imagine there was a customer success or go-to-market strategy at Pure Storage as well. But different times, and a lot's changed, a lot more data measurements going on today. It's interesting because so much has perhaps changed. I'm wondering if you could reflect a little bit for us on how perhaps that go-to-market journey has evolved, how it was different from the one you took it.
Yeah, a couple things. So first of all, data and rigor matters. And I'm not to say that data and rigor didn't matter in the past, but it was more of a relationship sale. Selling has historically been more of a relationship sale. And with the advent of technologies like Gong, for example, and the significant deluge of data people are able to understand and analyze now, it's become a lot more fact-based, a lot faster, right? You can sort of analyze this data and make your decisions, much faster versus kind of more of the old relationship world. Not that the relationship world is dead, but it's just, it's different, right? And then certainly the advent of social media and how people sell and market through the use of social media has been just radically different at my time here at Gong than it was at Pure, roughly now 10 years ago.
Now, what this chapter might be lacking, if we were to compare both, is an IPO. And I've read in the business press, no plans for an immediate IPO anyway. Can you reflect a little on that decision-making around that, whether to go public, not to go public? What's going on?
Yeah, again, and as you can imagine, as CFOs, we can't comment on IPO plans or market capitalization plans. I say the same thing here at Gong that I said at Pure at the time, is that our first and foremost focus is building a great business and a great franchise, whether that's a private company or a public company. So, we will continue to grow this business, and, we'll decide what we do with the markets when the time is right. It's really about, first of all, building a great franchise. And that's what, 1,200 of us are focused on here at the company.
This company is, you joined a company that was rather advanced in how it uses AI. It had an AI mindset from the day you stepped in the office, of course. But during your tenure, ChatGPT was introduced, and the world got wise together as we saw the potential. Individually, we saw the potential. And no doubt, licenses are now across the country with a company, where employees are experimenting and understanding better how they can use it to do, help them with their daily tasks. I'm just curious, it happened on your watch, of course. Was there a given, again, this is an AI savvy, smart company, but at the same time, these language models are empowering your people like no other time. Can you reflect a little on the arrival of ChatGPT and whether it changed and whether it's chat or some of the other?
I love that question, Jack. We get that question from investors a lot, is how has the advent of LLM and more commercial off-the-shelf technology affected your business? And in a nutshell, it's been a real tailwind. And I'll tell you why. Two things. You alluded to it. We were doing AI. We were doing some of our own LLM work before the advent of any of these technologies. And as you spent time with customers, people looked at you prior to ChatGPT almost as science fiction. We can really do this. I'm a little bit nervous. This is a little scary. And so on one hand, from a marketing perspective, with the advent of ChatGPT, with the advent of Anthropic and other models, it became mainstream. And so we had countless examples of customers saying, I was a little scared before ChatGPT. Now I get it. Where do I write the check? Right. So from a marketing perspective, big deal for us. We really were able to sort of ride those coattails. Also from a technology perspective, the advent of these LLMs allowed us to use a hybrid approach to AI. So we definitely are using the LLMs now, but that allows us to go innovate closer to the customer and to more specific tailored examples. It saves us a whole bunch of time and money from not having to do the generic understanding that you get from LLMs, and allow us to focus where, our innovation most matters, close to revenue professionals.
Curious to hear now, from what I understand, Gong's offerings, many of them are AI driven for, sales forecasting and other areas in the sales function. How do these tools enhance decision making within Gong, though? How are they being used within Gong? Some of what
we use them all the time. I could give you countless examples. Maybe you focus on the first one is, we use the technology to hear voice of the customer. Like we can start seeing and asking questions like, what is the most requested feature for our technology? Helps our product managers, build the right products. We can put together automated battle cards. How are we doing against the competition? What can we do better? And in the past, that was a lot of conjecture and frankly, a lot of hard work, rolling up your sleeves as an individual. Now you can ask the technology to do it for you. It's remarkable. It's really, really cutting edge.
So if you were to look at your customer interactions, give us a point of comparison here from the past, when you first arrived versus today, in terms of the types of customer interactions that you're able to measure, see, observe.
Yeah. Well, let me tell you a productivity story in that vein, Jack. When I first got there, got to Gong, and it's a personal story. I was I still am an executive sponsor for some of our most important customers. So I spend, once a quarter or once every 6 months. Hey, how are you doing? What are we doing? What can we do better? And we used to sort of require a handful of people to go out and generate a whole bunch of briefing information so that I was smart and intelligent about that account. It would take 2 or 3 people, a handful of weeks to pull this content together to prep for that meeting. With the technology now, 5 years forward, I can go ask Gong, what's going on with customer X? And it can spit out effectively a briefing document about what I need to do. So you can appreciate the productivity gains that give us, the accuracy, the data that gives us, and our customers are able to do this as well.
We want to understand better the numbers that you're keeping a close eye on and the KPIs, and we're always interested to learn, were those KPIs that mattered at Pure Storage? Maybe not, as a different company, but at the same time, we think things have evolved somewhat. So can you share with us some of those KPIs that you're always keeping an eye on?
Yeah.
Customer retention. I think we're going to hear a lot of customer KPIs. Probably.
100%. It's obviously the normal fare. Growth is number one, and obviously how fast the company is growing and what's going on is key and important. But kind of the next click, if you will, things like retention, things like NDR, and both gross retention and net retention. Obviously sometimes people will put a net retention out there without understanding how much you're retaining those core customers is super important, because as we all know, cost to acquire is a lot more expensive to cost to retain, right? So I keep a look at those measures. The classic efficiency measures, rule of 40, rule of X. For those of you that haven't studied rule of X, I think it's a natural sort of extension of rule of 40. I think it's an important one to measure. And then the one I really like, especially on a sales efficiency basis, is CAC payback. Right? A lot of people talk about LTV to CAC, and for a variety of reasons, that gets a little messy. But if I can sort of take comfort that we can sort of turn our sales investment into revenue and pay back that seller's commissions and all the things that go along with it very quickly, that gives me the confidence to keep pressing on the gas and keep it going.
I just curious if you've modified your FP&A team in some way, whether it's organizationally or the types of professionals you are placing in FP&A roles. I don't know. What would you share about FP&A, your FP&A mindset?
Yeah, a couple of things, I would say, a handful of things. In many ways, the FP&A composition at Pure is not different from Gong. There's a lot of remarkable similarities. But I would say I operate on a couple of themes, right? And for those of the folks that are in the FP&A team, they'll hear me say this all the time. FP&A has to be a strategic partner. It's not, you can't just report the weather. In fact, you can't just even forecast the weather. Both of those things are required, but you've got to use your skills to influence the weather, influence the business, sort of drive business results. Super, super important, number one. And then maybe the one thing I would say that has changed over time is the advent of all of these new technologies. Increasingly, we're looking for more analytically sophisticated or experienced people of real technology tools, things like SQL, things like R, right? When I was an FP&A professional, it was Excel, 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 and that's still important, but we want to see people that have sort of experiences in some of these new technologies, because you need them to sort of operate at speed and with the sort of large volumes of data that you can get.
So, the FP&A team is down the hall in a conference room, and Tim swings open the door. What do they think Tim's going to ask them for?
It depends. It depends on the day and depends on the business cycle. I'm going to probably ask two questions. How is revenue? How are we pacing for the quarter? So are we on track for our growth plans? Number one, and that's pretty consistent. And then number two, how are we doing? Are we on track with sort of, the special project of the week? And it feels like we're probably working on 2 or 3 of those at any given time, and they run a pretty wide gamut.
What comes to mind when we ask for a finance strategic moment?
I love this question, Jack. And I'll do a headline, usage matters. And I'll explain that a little bit. Like a lot of technology companies a couple of years ago, there was a lot of growth and momentum, and then things slowed down quite a bit. There were a lot of layoffs in the industry. We were seeing people sort of reduce their spend on technologies. And Gong was, sort of saw that as well. We had that sort of situation as well. And what happened is we started seeing people have to sort of reduce the number of seats that they were purchasing from our company. And we started asking, what can we do to maximize retention in a difficult environment, right? And it came back to usage matters. We had been measuring how people were using our technology, but we went 3 or 4 or 5 steps deeper. Like, what personas were using their technology? Where were they spending the most time? What were they sort of asking the system? Where were they getting the most value? And finance played a critical role in setting up the infrastructure, driving the insights and correlations to what we learn from those customers to help us sort of drive the highest retention possible. And I'd say over the arc of about 18 to 24 months, we drove our churn and downgrade rates down by half with that sort of relentless focus on understanding usage and helping our customer success people drive retention.
Okay, I want you to go back to that first 60 days and 90 days. And we always say, okay, what is the advice you'd like to go back in time and give yourself? But any more reflection there, I think, because you achieved something that's unusual and hard to do in a short amount of time. So congratulations. But I'm looking at it now, I'm like, wow, I haven't seen that before.
Thank you. Again, you touched on it, Jack, in terms of the importance, the CFO role. A big part of our roles are relationships with investors, right? There's no question about that. And that was, as we talked about a little bit earlier in the podcast here, not an area I had a lot of exposure to. And so it was important to surround yourself with great IR and Wall Street professionals, right? And I did that. I did that relatively quickly, but if I had to do it all over again, I would have probably done it almost day one, particularly given the pace we were moving to IPO at Pure Storage.
You had a recruiter on speed dial. I mean, you were looking for your IR team. You were looking to, yeah.
We were, but I think we were able to source that from just relationships and network. Back to that, the importance and the power of the board. We got in front of a handful of great professionals right out of the gates, and we selected one, and it worked really, really well for us.
The creation of the S1, no side story for us. Nothing surprising about that.
There are all kinds of fun stories along those lines. At pace. It was a pretty darn fast process. One of the things I would tell people is don't underestimate the importance of cross-functional collaboration there as well. Yes, the lawyers and the finance people can write this thing, but you need to have your marketing people, your CEO, your head of product, your revenue leader believing in kind of that vision. That business section arguably is the most important part of the document. So don't underestimate that as you go forward.
Nice. Thank you for that. Great insight there. Hey, we always like to ask our guests to reflect a little on the personal side for us. You've been there 5 years. Your colleagues might know a lot about you, but maybe they don't know this. What comes to mind?
Well, kind of hobbies and what I do outside of work. Most of the people at Gong know this. I am a diehard skier. I enjoy in resort. I enjoy backcountry. I enjoy getting up in a helicopter every once in a while. I've skied in a number of places around the world. I enjoy to travel as well, so you can kind of combine them, the two. So most people at Gong know that.
What about a book or a resource for us? And again, it doesn't have to be a business book. It might be something you just escape with or pursue your interests. Anything?
Yeah, I'll shout out a really good sort of weekly blog post by a gentleman by the name of Jam and Ball. And interestingly enough, I've got a personal connection. He was one of the bankers we had on the IPO. So I've known him in the past. But I stumbled upon his blog later in my career, and it's called Clouded Judgment. And really, really insightful what's going on in the tech community. And I think he does a good job of combination of two things. He runs a set of staples, so there's a consistent dialogue week after week on the same topics. But then he also does here's the new topic of the day, right, or the week. And I think it's been a really, really good read. Highly encourage it.
I can't let you go without asking you one more Google question.
Yeah, go ahead.
For those who are, someone comes to you and says, I'm thinking of, and I'm sure you've stayed acquainted with Google in one way or another. I'm thinking of joining Google, and you turn to them and I say, I have a piece of advice for you. What would that be?
Well, it depends, right? Obviously, Google is a much different company than when I joined. We were about 1,700 people when I joined and under $1 billion of revenue. And when I left 10 years ago, we were already $60 billion of revenue, right? So it's changed quite a bit. What I would say is that you really want to say, you really want to ask yourself, what is the thing that you want to get out of that experience? I think very highly of the company still today. At the same time, it is not the startup that it was by definition. It's just it's a much larger company. And so for people that have that startup bent and that startup blood, it might not be the thing for them. For people that want to see size and scale and solve interesting problems, it might be. So it's just going to be situational specific.
Okay. Tim Ritters, who spent a decade inside the Google finance lane. We are up to our final question. We'd like you to look forward finally, and what we're interested in are your CFO priorities for the coming 12 months. What would those be?
Yeah, I think they're very much aligned with what we're trying to do here overall at Gong. Number one, growth is it all starts with growth at the end of the day. But just as importantly, it's diversifying our revenue base across more and more verticals, spending more time with the most important, largest customers in the world. So that upmarket focus number. So that's number two. And then number three, continue to be the undisputed category leader. We talked about Gong as being the leader in revenue AI technology. We want to continue to sort of press on the gas on that one as well. And we in finance have a role to play in virtually all of those goals.
Tim Ritters, thank you for joining us on CFO Thought Leader.
Thank you, Jack. Appreciate it.